You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So, this, of course, being the last show of 2022. In fact, it's very nearly the last day. Tomorrow is the last day of 2022. We were supposed to do this show last week, but unfortunately, once again, we were prevented from doing so due to unforeseen circumstances. But it actually works out better that it's this Friday because...
I was actually going to say that, too.
Yeah.
Considering the topic, yeah.
Considering the topic, yes. It actually worked out better for us, and I think all of you, that we're doing this topic on pretty much what amounts to be the second to last day of 2022, and that is what's coming to Disney Plus in 2023. Now, we did actually something similar last year. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was framed a little bit differently, though. I don't know if it was limited. I don't think it was limited to Disney Plus. I think it was pretty much all the Star Wars content or whatever that was coming, period, in 2022. And that included movies, that included, I think, some books or comics. It was a little bit more all-encompassing. And, of course, some of the stuff ended up coming out, and other stuff we're going to be talking about again is coming out in 2023. But this one I think is a little bit more definitive. I think that this is a safer bet. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight actually has real release dates attached to it. I mean, official release dates attached. In some cases, we have trailers. In the case of The Bad Batch, it's coming out next week. So, I mean, this one's a little bit more of a surefire bet. This is not as speculative as some of the ones that we've done in the past. So, I don't know. There's a lot to be excited for just on the Disney Plus front in 2023 for Star Wars. And, of course, with the films up in the air, this is pretty much where you're going to get any Star Wars content probably until 2024 at the very least.
Yeah, I think that with this upcoming year, we have a smorgasbord, if you will, of starlights that are going to definitely grace our palette. Everything from animation to some live action stuff. It's going to be something for everybody. Some new programs are actually underway, and we get to revisit some older ones, and even some we don't care too much for.
Well, it's interesting. But you do bring up a good point, though, that there's actually a good cross-section of different types of content this time. You have some live action stuff. You have some animated ones. You have some that's a little bit more geared towards the younger generation, the younger kids. You have some stuff that's geared more towards, well, us.
Adults, yeah.
Yeah. And,
right.
I mean, look, 2022 was a really great year, as it turned out. Now, of course, a lot of the predictions that we had made last year, well, they just didn't pan out, to be quite honest. But there was a lot of stuff that did. We got Obi-Wan. We got Andor. Man, that can't be it, is it?
No.
I'm trying to think back.
We got Tales of the Jedi. We have that.
Yes, Tales of the Jedi. And if you guys missed our reviews on any of these, they are on the channel. So yeah, there was a good amount of stuff. I mean, it wasn't like it was a lot really, as far as quantity, but as far as quality, we actually got some really good shows. And I think, did the Book of Boba Fett end right before? Was that completely wrapped up by December? It might have been. Or did that actually bleed into January? I don't actually remember.
Bled into January, if I'm not,
it may have.
Mistaken.
So I was going to say, I mean, we may have gotten a little bit of the Book of Boba Fett in there too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's really cool the fact that we have, in this go around, we have a lot of different mediums, as far as animated versus live action. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something for everybody. um, and like I said, even new shows. So it's not just shows that we're following the upcoming season on, but
Right.
even brand new content. So
Yeah,
yeah.
actually, I would say, I mean, from the ones that we're going to cover, and again, I mean, we're primarily dealing with a lot of the stuff that's been announced and released. There are some other things that would fall into the category of speculation, but we're going to try and stay away from that. But I mean, even just, we're obviously going to go a little bit more in depth talking about each of these shows. It's pretty much what the whole show is going to be about tonight. And then, of course, we welcome your live chats. If you guys want to make a comment in there, already kicked off on what are you the most excited about seeing. Certainly, if you're not watching this live, you can leave that in the comments section. And of course, while you're there, if you enjoy what you're seeing and, you pretty much like the vibe of our show, be sure to hit that like button, show that you like the video, and hit the subscribe button. So, yeah, I think, honestly, there's a lot to be excited about as a Star Wars fan. And again, we're not even really covering all the book releases, the comics. We might cover that maybe in another show at some point in January. It just depends. I mean, of course, on Mondays we have our What is Star Wars series. And just as a sneak preview, Monday we're going to be talking about The Empire Strikes Back. So, this past Monday we talked about A New Hope. The week before that, we talked about the entire legacy. So, if you guys are looking for a little bit of a deeper dive into Star Wars, you could check those out. But certainly, right now, we're seeing the epitome of what makes Star Wars, because of a lot of the things that we've been talking about. There is a lot of era jumping, some, different characters that are featured. They're not just putting all their focus in one time period like they have in some other years, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, man. So what do you say? We could kind of just
Kind of
jump
go
into
right
this.
into it. All right. Well,
Yeah, we got quite a bit of few things.
yeah. I mean, first, obviously, like I said, it's coming out next week, January 4th, season 2 of The Bad Batch. Now, this, of course, was something that I remember when the first season was announced, before the show even came out. I remember you and I were a little skeptical about it. We weren't sure we really needed it. Because, again, this is a group, and depending on how you look at things, they were actually, the name anyway, was actually introduced way back in one of the earlier seasons of the Clone Wars. But the Bad Batch characters that we actually grew to know, I think, made their debut in season 7 of the Clone Wars, and then the show was kind of a spin-off of that. And of course, one of the biggest things that was just huge for this one is it's our first glimpse into what happened once the Empire actually take over. What does the galaxy look like? What does, pretty much what's going on? And we're seeing it through the eyes of this clone trooper group or whatever that was considered rejects because, they basically just didn't have that whole obedient thing. They actually had individual personalities, individual talents. And
they didn't all look alike.
Yeah, and I mean, it basically, I thought anyway, that this show ended up just greatly surpassing any expectations that I had. So, for anybody that hasn't actually seen when we covered this in depth before, and again, if you guys are interested, you can always go back and check out our reviews on season 1 of The Bad Batch. But just take everybody through your thoughts when you first heard The Bad Batch announced and what you ended up thinking about it.
Yeah, when I first heard The Bad Batch was announced for season 1, I thought it was like, okay, much like you, do we really need this? Why is this so important? And I think they just used them as the conduit to really show us what was going on immediately after the Empire takes over, which was a very smart move because, you're basically getting it from the inside. You're getting it from people who were actually in the Republic and who are now being transformed into new Galactic. And the best being, part of the clone troopers, which will eventually migrate over into becoming stormtroopers. Uh, we get to see that shift and how that happened. Once again, this is a show that's kind of filling in the gaps uh, between episodes 3 and 4, and we start to see, how this ragtag group of uh, rejects basically are viewing their old life. Like they've kind of been exiled, um, and they're kind of having to kind of act as mercenaries in a way, but they're kind of taking their jobs on their own to kind of sustain themselves. But along the way, we see, they come into um, meeting Omega, who we later find out is a sibling to Boba Fett, and it's really just a really cool show. Like at first, I really didn't think it was necessary. I liked them in the Clone Wars; they were a cool little group, but I think we needed a whole series on them. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
But
That's where I was at too.
but I think they just used them because they were the perfect conduit to really show. All right, if we're gonna show from how the empire is changing, what would be a good perspective to show it from? And it's like, okay, well, what would it look like from a trooper's perspective, since they're the ones going out constantly fighting the battles? How are they viewing it? And because everybody else is obedient, they're just doing what they always do. Whereas this group, not having that obedience thing really down, you could use them as the window to kind of show globally or galactically what's going on. So I thought it was a brilliant move.
Well, in addition to that, even the other reason why I think that was a brilliant move too, just to add to that, was the fact that it did address something that I figured would have to be addressed, and then how did the clone troopers move over to stormtroopers?
Mm-hmm.
It's, and when did that happen? Because we know that by the
Mm-hmm.
time that we see the Empire, the earliest instance of the Empire that we see before the Bad Batch is Solo. Solo took place like right around the time of the Obi-Wan series, but it was probably about a year before even. It's kind of 9-10 years, something like that, after the Empire is well established. So they're already stormtroopers by then. So we know that this transition happened fairly quickly. I mean, if we're being honest, it's not like it was because we know there's about 19 years in between episode 3 and 4, and we know that it wasn't a slow progression to go from clone troopers to stormtroopers. In any of the media that takes place within that time period, you never see like a mixture of the two. It's, I mean, it just, boom, they're stormtroopers. So this show pretty much had to address how that works, and of course they do. So when it comes to season 2, though, that we've already had a trailer that was out. Another trailer has been released. Actually, I think a couple of them have been, honestly. I know they dropped another trailer. I think it's called The Enemy or something like that. It's supposed to be the final trailer, which, of course, I mean, it's less than a week, actually. I mean, it's next Wednesday is when we're going to get the premiere of this thing. So I think the time for trailers is past. And honestly, beyond that one that we tried to review and then had some technical issues, beyond that one, I really didn't need to see. This isn't that type of show where I need to see every little trailer from it. I figure, you know what? Give me a little bit of a glimpse on what's happening, and now I'm ready for the show. And that's basically the way I looked at this. And I could see that there's some promising things that are happening. It definitely, as we said during the review, look, there's some really cool elements that I think that are in store for us in this second season. And I definitely am primed and ready for this thing. Now, I don't remember how many episodes are supposed to be in this. This one is particularly long, though. Wasn't the first one, like, I forgot how many episodes were in the first season now? It had to be at least 12. I mean, I remember that review that we did went on for, like a half a year or something. At least it seemed that way. I mean, it wasn't Clone Wars level, but
it was 16 actually.
Okay. So, and what about season 2? Since you're
Uh,
probably
yes,
right there. Might as well look that up. Let's get that out in the open. I want to know how many reviews we have to do.
16.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
can, and just so you guys know, because this is the first one coming out, which means it's actually going to overlap The Mandalorian Season 3, because that comes out March 1st. So we're pretty much going to be tied up. I mean, I don't know when we're going to finish our What is Star Wars thing. We got a lot we got to go through on that one. So we're probably going to start dedicating the Friday shows to the reviews. And so you can pretty much expect a week from tonight we're going to be reviewing. I think they're releasing the first 2 episodes of The Bad Batch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that The Bad Batch has got a lot going for it. I think that there's a lot that we can get excited for when it comes to The Bad Batch. There's a lot more meat on this bone. There's a lot of surprising things that they can cover in this thing, that you really wouldn't have thought previously. I mean, they're dealing a lot with a little bit of Order 66. We see a little bit of that in the beginning. They're dealing with how the Empire is not who they seem to be, and there's certain systems that are finding out. So David writes, and he says, "Hello, gentlemen. I'm looking forward to it because after having watched Episode 4, Bad Batch 2 reminds me of the sense of wonder from Episode 4. It looks fun." And that is another good point, actually, is that I think the Bad Batch, even though there's a definite darkness to it, it does seem to lean a little bit more on the side of Episode 4, A New Hope, or Solo. Solo, I actually thought, captured that swashbuckling sort of Flash Gordon Saturday matinee fun that Star Wars used to have before it got really weighed down and, a lot of issues, right? Where it was trying to cover, and I don't mean issues like production issues, and I mean, because even if you look at The Phantom Menace, there's more weight to it. They're dealing a little bit more with how the Republic essentially fell. And even though there's a little bit of that in the original trilogy, at least with The New Hope, maybe not so much Empire, because Empire was pretty dark, but A New Hope and even Return of the Jedi kind of had that fun Saturday matinee swashbuckling type of feel to it. And so I think in a lot of ways, the Bad Batch might do the same.
Yeah, Bad Batch kind of has that feel good because you have these guys that are, adopted this little girl that's pretty much like now part of their crew now, and her origins make it really interesting. And then, you have the different personalities of all the different troopers between Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, and all everybody. You have all these different personalities that makes it fun, and their interaction between each other definitely makes it a fun ride.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that overall that's going to be, I mean, I don't know. I think when you really look at when we cover all these things, right? When we put it all out there, and then I'm sure by the time we're doing our wrap up on this thing tonight, we're going to find that there's going to be a lot to get excited for. I mean, there's a lot of fun to be had in pretty much all these series that we're covering. Now, obviously in 2024, which I think is around the time The Acolyte is supposed to come out, that might be a little weighty. I don't know. We'll have to see. David then goes on to say, after watching the trailer, you get the impression that we're going somewhere or we're off to save the world. And that's kind of what I liked about the Bad Batch series. It's the fact that there's definitely especially when Sid gets involved, there's almost like a Mission Impossible kind of, right? You know how they go, they get their latest mission and their marching orders, and then they go off on this adventure. And then, of course, they find out some things along the way, and certain things about the Empire is uncovered or whatnot. But, I mean, essentially, that's the format. You go to the boss, they give you
Right.
the marching orders or, whatever that particular mission is, and off you go. And I think that that's a cool format to have this show. All right. So is there anything else you want to mention on the Bad Batch?
That's pretty much it.
All right. Well, then
Really.
after the Bad Batch, of course, now we get to the big kahuna. We get to season 3 of The Mandalorian. So this right here is going to be probably, if I had to put it in order of importance, I think this is going to be the most important of all the Star Wars premieres that we're getting this year, because this, of course, is their flagship series as far as live action goes. It's going to be the first live action debut of 2023, because remember, the Bad Batch is an animated series. So after the January 4th premiere of the Bad Batch, while that thing is ticking along, probably around the time that we get, I don't know, like episode 8 or 9 or whatever it is, like when we're halfway through the Bad Batch season, we're going to get on March 1st, The Mandalorian Season 3, and that's going to get dropped on us. Now that was interesting because, and you and I were talking about this for a while, this thing actually, I think, was delayed, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't.
Production
I don't think it
was.
delayed.
I think the production
Yes.
was because of COVID.
Yeah, that might be the case. Yeah.
And then, because I remember there was a time where we were going to get a trailer for it, and then that didn't really happen, and it really was only like last summer, I think, that we started to finally get any footage at all from this thing. I mean, of course, there was a leak trailer that we reviewed. We actually reviewed the leak trailer, and I remember miraculously that thing is still up, and it's for the most part intact. You know, there's some things that we put on this channel or that we've reviewed, and they just butchered it. Either they've taken it off completely, like our Family Guy review of Blue Harvest, or they would, mute certain sections or cut it up. The leaked trailer, which is the one thing that you would think they would actually want to protect at all costs, it's relatively untouched, so it's still up there. And then, of course, when the official trailer came out, we reviewed that as well, and that was a little bit more toward the fall. So now we know that we've got some really, really cool, exciting stuff happening for this thing, for the season 3 of The Mandalorian.
Yeah, season 3 of Mandalorian, it's really wide open at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is one of those shows that is kind of writing itself, as it were. We last left, Luke Skywalker, came in and saved the day at the end of season 2. That sparked a whole lot of stuff. So we got a chance to see a little bit more of him in the Book of Boba Fett. However, in this, we're definitely going to be dealing with Mandalore now. We're definitely going to be dealing with the reestablishment of Mandalore. We've talked about the Mandalorian season 3 a lot, as far as things that they have to cover. So we know we got to deal with Moff Gideon. We have to deal with Grogu, as far as his making his choice not to become a Jedi, but to stay with Din. We're going to be dealing with, of course, Katie Sackhoff's character of Bo-Katan, dealing with her rivalry that she now has to have with Din, because he's the holder of the Darksaber. Wants it because she wants to be the ruler of Mandalore.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to be dealing with the different factions and all those things. So, the Mandalorian season 3 has a lot of weight coming into it. We don't know what surprises they have. Giancarlo Esposito pretty much said that there's going to be some major surprises in this one. No doubt. I'm sure there always is, from season 1, from when we first saw the Darksaber, to season 2 with Luke Skywalker returning. So we don't know what's going to happen in season 3. So the only thing we can say is, it's probably going to be really exciting. Carl Weathers is directing some of the episodes. Some of the usual directors are already directing some of the episodes. So I'm really excited for it. Bryce Dallas Howard is back.
Thank goodness.
Right. This one gentleman, I like his style too. I can never pronounce his last name, but it starts with the F. It's like
I know. He's been on since the beginning.
Yeah, he's been on since the beginning. So I'm excited for season 3 of Mandalorian. I think that it's going to have some more cute moments with Grogu, of course. Hopefully, he won't be destroying someone's, lineage by eating their young. um, but all in all, yeah, this is going to be a really cool thing around. Was it March 1st? Yeah.
Yep. And I mean, there's a lot of good points in this. I mean, first of all, like you said, of all these shows, The Mandalorian season 3 is probably the one that you and I have covered to death. I mean, we've dedicated multiple shows on it because, quite frankly, that's what we've gotten in the news the most. I mean, it seemed like every week there was some new development coming out. Here's the new set pictures, and here's a bunch of new characters, and here's a new direction, and here's the latest rumor. And so there was just, by covering any of the Star Wars current events, we're automatically covering. And I remember there was this whole chunk, I think it was like in the last spring or summer, where everything was, hey, guess what? We're talking about season 3 of The Mandalorian again. But here's the other thing that's kind of surprising too. Number one, you alluded to it, but the Book of Boba Fett, in some cases, for 2 or 3 episodes, kind of served as The Mandalorian season 2.5.
Yeah, it's almost like a prequel to the.
It really
to the
was.
Season, in a way.
It was kind of like that half season. It was 2.5. I mean, it really was the bridge that got us from season 2 of The Mandalorian going into season 3. So now they don't have to deal with, what happened when Luke took Grogu and, all this other stuff. They kind of wrapped up some of those storylines so they could start fresh now.
Right. Get to the money.
Absolutely. Sure, because Grogu's back with them. Then the other thing that you kind of mentioned, which really was a surprising thing, because the guy that's done the most interviews on this thing is Giancarlo Esposito. He's the guy that's actually had the most screen time, I guess you could say, as far as interviews go. So that leads me to believe a couple of things. Number one, I think we're going to see a strong Moff Gideon presence in this thing.
I hope so, because I love his character, man.
Oh, his character's amazing. And, he was at the Star Wars Celebration, and he's done a bunch of interviews. And I mean, anytime that The Mandalorian Season 3 has been mentioned, somewhere he pops up and he starts talking about it. So that's really encouraging. And again, there were a lot of things that were brought up where you kind of know where they should go. And once we saw the trailers and everything, yeah, we know we're going to get a heavy Mandalore presence. We know that there's going to be a lot probably to do with Bo-Katan and Din as far as the Darksaber goes and, how they're going to resolve that, if they resolve that this season. Because, again, we really don't know how many seasons they plan to go with this show.
No, we don't. We do know that it's going to be 8 episodes again, so that much we do know.
Okay, well, that was going to be my next question, actually, was, how many episodes is this thing? Because generally the Mandalorian sweet spot is around 8. Actually, a lot of the shows, 8 to 10 is usually, for any of these shows, that's how it generally works, unless it's Obi-Wan, that was sort of disappointing that it was only 6, but to me...
Andor was 12.
Yeah, and really, I think all these shows should be 12. Because just of what they could deal with. But 8 to 10, I would say, would be sort of your sweet spot, right? Because if you start pushing beyond that, depending on what you're trying to do, and some people would argue, I know David would argue this, that there was some filler in Andor as well, And so I think, honestly, you could go for an 8 to 10 episode story arc. And that's the sweet spot to where you could tell a good, compelling story, but avoid the trap of filler episodes and everything else. That's the reason why, quite frankly, you had a bunch of... I've been watching the Smallville podcast, Talkville, and one of the things that Rosenbaum and Welling always point out was that, all right, this episode wasn't really the best. And it's... And one of the reasons was because back then you had to put out 22 episode seasons, and it's really hard. And especially Smallville being probably the first superhero, higher budget television show, because they did break a lot of ground with that show. And it's really hard to keep up the pace. But really where I'm coming from on this is just the writing aspect of it. It's really hard to write just knocking it out of the park each time with really good, compelling episodes and avoiding the filler stuff. So I'm glad to see that they do this whole, 8 to 10 episodes. 6, I think, might be a little bit too little. I mean, I think that now you run the risk of having to try to cram too many things in.
Yeah.
Let's see. Before we move on, David says, I miss Gina from The Mandalorian. Well,
yeah,
it's hard to do that because we haven't yet seen a Gina-less Mandalorian, if you really stop and think about it. Now, granted, it seems that way because her firing was announced like 2 years ago or something. But she's in season 2.
Yeah, she's in that, yeah, she's in that scene. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're gonna miss just her compliment to Din. I love their byplay. I love the relationship they kind of had with each other. I like, that they gave us a woman with who's tough and who's got that that kick butt attitude without shoehorning. It didn't feel forced, and that's what I'm getting at. It didn't feel forced like some other characters where they kind of forced, the characters to do it without any justification for it. It's like, okay, why is this person able to do this? It seemed like it's shoehorned, whereas her character naturally was from jump. She had a backstory. She's a jump trooper. She had all this stuff.
Shock trooper, actually, but yeah.
Shock trooper.
But here's the thing that goes along with that point, though, which 100%, because I didn't think about that aspect of it. You're right. They created a strong female character, but without shoehorning the strength and femaleness of her, right? But the other thing that they avoided, which is something they almost never avoid in these type of shows. So you established Din, Cara, and Greef as kind of like this cool little trio, right?
Right.
But they didn't shoehorn them in every episode once they were all friends. I mean, they made a couple of very organic feeling appearances in season 2, and I'm sure, Greef Karga, being Carl Weathers' character, he's going to make some appearances in 3. But again, it feels like a very natural appearance. It's not like, ooh, let's jam these familiar characters in and make them a team, because they got a really cool rapport. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I get it. I go back and forth. I mean, I really wish they would just, now that Iger's back and he's trying to right a lot of the wrongs, and some of this is cool down.
Reverse that and bring Gina Carano back. Yeah,
it would be nice. I mean, because I go back and forth. It's like you could technically recast the character, but I would actually, at this point, if they don't bring her back, then create another character that fills that role. I mean, there's no shortage of, there's many people that would have that same kind of deal going in the universe. You could just bring another stronger female blood character or something like that, and just have her fill the Cara Dune role without actually being Cara Dune.
True.
All right, so moving on, we have this one. Now, this is the one that I personally anyway know the least about. This Young Jedi Adventures thing. I know that it's basically set in the Jedi Temple. I know it's kind of how do I want to describe it? It's sort of like where they're looking for something or something. I don't know. I actually, like I said, this is the one I know the least about.
It's really focused for preschoolers and grade school kids, and so I don't think I probably would really watch this one. honestly. I
Yeah, I
think this
mean,
is more for like this is almost like Paw Patrol for like, Star Wars fans or something like that. Like I'm okay with that. Like go on, do your thing, but you know.
well, I might watch an episode or two of it because, again, I did end up watching Star Wars Resistance, and Resistance was another one that was very much aimed at the very young audience. However, it had Poe Dameron in it for a while. It had a couple of very cool adult characters in it. It did forward some canon. In fact, they even had Hux's whole speech from The Force Awakens. Like, they were sort of showing that, that other perspective, right? Like, okay, they're showing other people in the galaxy basically watching this and how they're affected by it. So there were some really cool moments in that. Now, admittedly, it's going to be a little bit harder to watch than, say, The Bad Batch, but it was kind of cool. And for this, I think it depends, because there's a couple of things that I do remember reading about it. And again, I apologize, I don't really know that much about this thing. I could probably look it up right now, but this is one of those where we're just saying, hey, this is coming out in 2023. I don't even know if anybody that regularly watches us would even necessarily care about this. However, like I said, much like Resistance, you got to be really careful because sometimes they sneak in some really cool canon stuff. They do the same thing with video games. Like, I remember having one of my friends explain all the cutscenes and everything from Jedi Fallen Order, because it turned out there was a lot of really important things that happened in that game that are somewhat necessary in further understanding some of the content that they released in The Mandalorian, in parts of the sequel trilogy. I mean, there's just like a lot of stuff that's there. So, and then of course they're coming out with the sequel to that game. So that's another thing. And I'll probably do the same thing. I mean, I was terrible at the game, by the way. I was awful. There was like this one level I couldn't even get past at all. And I don't really suck at video games, but this just couldn't do it, So I just had one of my friends explain it to me.
This particular show, like I said, Young Jedi Adventures, is pretty much. See, I could understand Resistance being geared towards like younger kids, like maybe 8, 9, 10 years old or something like that. But this is geared towards really little kids, like I said, it's the Paw Patrol or Caliu or whatever, Dora the Explorer or something like that. It's that type of show, where they're talking about like, oh, we have to, use discipline. Discipline means that you have to. It's one of those type of shows. It's like a PBS meet Star Wars or something like that. It's like Sesame Street and Star Wars got together and had a baby. So
So in other words, don't come to you with like, yes, we're gonna do the Young Jedi Adventures review show.
We're not. I refuse. I'm putting my foot down right now. I'm not doing that. Sure, if you have younglings at home, sure, it's a great thing, and then maybe that's your way of introducing them into Star Wars, getting them into Star
that's
Wars
probably
early,
what it is.
And I think that's essentially what this is. Yeah, exactly. Essentially, that's what this is. It's trying to get the younger, as young as you could possibly go.
Mm-hmm.
Besides,
grooming. It's all about grooming.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
just
they're gonna cover all
saying it like it is.
Jedi, things of patience, self-control, that type of stuff.
But again, sometimes.
I mean, I'm not saying they won't sneak canon into it.
Well, and I'm not saying that I'm gonna watch like every single episode. I mean, there's some stuff. I'm trying to think if there is anything. Well, I remember when that terrible Ewok Adventure show came out back in the mid 80s. I mean, I think I watched like one episode. I'm like, okay, I'm done. But that was like a different set of rules though, because Lucas was more in control, and the expanded universe, was kind of like there was cherry pick things for canon, and it's kind of like, well, if I didn't come up with it, it's not. This is a little different now because Disney does sneak in this whole concept of everything being canon. And a lot of times, you think of some of the video games, you think of a show like this, you go, well, I don't know. But every once in a while, there's some big, crazy, revelation. I think they do that on purpose because they know that the hardcore Star Wars guys are going to watch every little bit that they think is going to have some big thing. But, we'll see.
Because they know, the hardcore Star Wars fans are trying to make, they're showing this to the kids, so it keeps the parents entertained.
That's sure, and that's a good point too. Now, do we have a release date on this one? I don't remember. Well, look that up. Look that up. I'll get to David's comment here. He says, "At least my son has something cool to watch that won't make me want to kill myself." I mean, we hope.
I think a little squat.
We hope. I mean, we'll,
Right.
Who knows? Because look, I mean, I'll be honest. There were some episodes of Resistance that I thought were amazing, and I really enjoyed watching them. They had a villain in there that was just incredible. But then there were other ones where I'm like, I'm probably going to open a vein before this episode is over. I'm just saying. So I think it just, what's that?
It's just the spring. So I'm presuming between March and April, maybe.
Yeah. Or, yeah, somewhere in the second quarter, March to May, probably. Yeah. All right. Well, moving on from Young Jedi Adventures, since, let's face it, this isn't exactly our demographic here, and there's only so much we could talk about this thing. And, I mean, I don't know, there hasn't even been a trailer or anything for this thing, right?
No, there is one.
Oh, is there? Yeah, well, all right, moving on. Oh, look, it's your favorite. Yeah, speaking of shows you wish we wouldn't review.
Well, guys, I have to head out. It's been great.
Yeah, may the force be with you.
With you.
Yeah, look, well, when this one I thought had a release date too, or did they say something stupid like the fall of 23 or something? I mean,
more than likely, it's spring of 23.
Oh, is it?
Okay. So maybe like around May or
Yeah, that could be. So, I mean, Visions, now here's the thing. In Visions, it's funny because there are both episodes that, some were extremely hard to get through. But then there were a couple of really cool ones. I remember there was some in the middle where you're like, wow, dude, I actually like this episode. I mean, I don't just like it for Visions, like grading on a curve. I mean, I really like this episode. And I think a lot of it has to do with which artist is, because again, one of the things that I thought was interesting that I did read about this is that they're using a completely different set of studios again. So for those who don't know, what Visions basically is conceptually is Lucasfilm reached out to a bunch of Japanese anime studios and said, here, take Star Wars and put your own spin on it and come up with like these 15-minute, 20-minute little shorts or whatever. And they're not tied together in any way, shape, or form. They're just all, the studio.
One-offs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's essentially, and David probably would like this. It's essentially, if you marry, once again, I'm, love connection tonight. So in this situation, it's more like if you marry Star Wars with Dragon Ball Z or something like that, and
or Fist of the North Star, Vampire Hunter D, or any of the ones, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like you take the anime world and you drop the anime world into a Star Wars world, and there you go. But the stories like this, the stories don't connect, so it's not like you're following a plot or a storyline or anything like that. It's just, what this I had. It's basically I had this vision of if I could do Star Wars in the anime world, this is what it would look like.
Right, and it's every studio doing their own episode, and they just compile each individual episodes and go, okay, this is such and such studio's version of Star Wars, and the next episode is another one. And if I remember correctly, they dropped them all at once. We reviewed them, obviously, episode by episode. But much like Tales of the Jedi, I think they dropped Visions all at once.
Right.
And they did that especially because there is such a disconnect. It would be pointless to do a week by week because there's absolutely no connective tissue to the thing at all. So it's not going to be a season 2 done by these same studios. It's going to be a completely different anthology, if you will, of yet another batch. Now, I don't know if there's, I don't know if there's any repeated studios. So I don't know if any of the same studios that did anything in season 1 are going to do season 2. I think, if I remember the article correctly, I think that it was all different studios. Like, there was no repeated ones. But, I could be wrong. Maybe you can look that up while we entertain David's comment, because this is a good one. He says, "Why do y'all hate it? This sounds amazing." Well, I'll tell you why.
Likes it.
Well, yes and no.
Eric likes Visions.
I do, but I didn't like everything. And see, for me, it depends because, a lot of times when people say, "Oh, I'm an anime fan," I'm like, okay, but what kind of anime? Because that's, there's a lot of different types of anime. I used to be really big into it in the 90s, the early to mid 90s especially. I was like huge into it. And my friend was into it. He kind of introduced me to it. And so things like Fist of the North Star, Vampire Hunter D, those are the two that I actually hold in absolute high regard. I mean, they're just amazing, right? And then there's other ones that I've since forgotten because, to be honest, as much as I love the whole anime thing, I kind of lost touch with it. I mean, the closest that I've come to it recently is they've done kind of a new... Netflix does a new Ultraman series that's technically anime. That's incredible. Another incredible... They just released season 2, I think, this past fall. It's great. But I'm not watching anime like I used to. The problem is... it's not so much like all the artwork is incredible. It's just that some of the concepts that they came up with, there's some stuff that's really hard to follow and it's just so convoluted that you really don't know what you just saw. And I don't necessarily mind the fact, I mean, the only episode that I think you and I really differed on was the first one. Like right out the gate. I remember it was funny because I'm watching it going, okay, this is cool, because again, it was basically like what would happen if Star Wars took place in feudal Japan, because that's totally, I mean, even R2-D2 was kind of made of like, I don't know, like a weird bamboo or, it was kind of like it was the total feudal Japan kind of style, right? And the main guy who they actually were going to have some sort of like, they were going to do a novel on him or something. I forgot the character's name, but he was really cool. He kind of reminded me of your Fist of the North Star Vampire Hunter D type character, right? And I remember right out the gate, I was just like, yeah, this is really cool. And you're just kind of like, yeah, I kind of hated it, to be honest. Didn't like it at all. And I was like, whoa, okay, it's going to be one of these things, right? And so the second episode hit. You didn't hate it as much as the first one, but you still kind of hated it. And then that became sort of the running theme of our reviews, was it made it a little bit more interesting because while I didn't love every episode, I could usually find some redeeming quality about them. You just hated it. There was only one exception. There was one episode. I don't remember which one. And then there was another one that I thought you were going to hate, and that's the one where that kid formed that rock band and he had to play at Jabba's thing or something. Yeah. And that ended up actually being kind of a cool episode. And I remember I thought you were going to tear on it, and you were kind of like, no, actually, that was interesting. Like, it was, I don't know if I'd want to see a whole series based on this guy, but I mean, it was kind of a cool take on it.
My biggest thing, I think the reason why I didn't care for Visions was the fact that sometimes I couldn't understand like where they were going with the story,
That's
like
it.
what story they were trying to tell, and
Exactly.
that was always my big thing, David. So to answer that question for you is that a lot of times it was just very avant-garde. You just kind of like, all right, what is this? What's happening? I don't understand.
Right, but there was a
Um,
couple of cool ones. Like, remember that
but
one
there
with the
were a
old
couple of
Sith
cool
Lord
ones
or
where,
whatever on that planet, and he ended up. I mean, there were some ones that
yeah,
were just incredible, and I remember you and I both saying, "Wow, if the whole show were like this, it would
yeah,
be
I'm all
amazing."
about it.
And
Yeah,
who knows, season 2 might actually be like that because again, there's a couple of things. Let me know what you're thinking, but what I'm thinking is that one, they may have learned from the first season and maybe some of the reactions to the first season. And two, you got all new studios involved, so who knows?
yeah. So the thing is with this, with like you said, as you aforementioned, the season one was primarily dealing with Japan, right? This season is going to be now it has expanded culturally. So not only are you getting Japan, you're getting Spain.
Oh wow,
What's
okay.
some? Yeah, you're getting Spain, United Kingdom. You're getting all these different cultures that.
United Kingdom?
Uh,
That's so stupid.
so it's,
Star Wars is the UK.
I know.
It means it's just a normal Star Wars thing. United
Well,
Kingdom.
maybe out.
No
Hey
offense
man,
to our. I know. Look, we got some people that watch us from the UK, so I don't.
across the pond, yeah.
Yeah, I don't. For our friends across the pond, I mean no disrespect. All my only point being that Star Wars kind of
Well, a lot of
originated. It's kind of a UK thing, It's filmed over there.
yeah.
It's all the actors are from there. I wouldn't necessarily call this a cultural stretch, if you understand what I'm saying. That's all I'm saying.
Spain, Ireland, India, and Africa, just to name a few.
Well, here's something
Um,
that David
and
brings
there's
up,
going to be
though.
9 episodes.
Oh, is it? What was the
Yep,
first one?
9.
Okay, so it's the same thing then.
Yep.
All right. Here's David's question. This is actually a good one. Not to imply the others aren't. In light of Monday's theme, is Vision Star Wars?
I see where he's
No,
going with this.
it's not.
Yeah, I don't. Not. No, it's not.
You have to understand that what this is Lucasfilm saying, here, anime studios, put Star Wars in the anime world. If Star Wars were your creation or your thing, what would you do with it?
Yeah.
It's not actually Star Wars, and in fact, Lucasfilm definitely went out of their way in the beginning to say, "Hey, listen, none of this is canon. None of it.
Mhm.
This is a
Right.
alternate universe, kind of a what if. This is just if
Let's
Star
have
Wars
fun
was
with
an
this.
anime thing, yeah, exactly. Let's have fun with it. If it was an anime project, what would you all do with these characters and this universe?"
Yeah,
That's
and it's
all.
not any characters that we're familiar with either. So it's not
Right.
like you got Yoda and Duke. I mean, they got these people don't even have the time to even have names. They just pop up and you're just like, okay,
Yep.
there's
Yep.
the old man, and then he's got a
Yeah.
cane that this turns into a lightsaber or something stupid, or the first episode where the guy had an umbrella that was like a helicopter lightsaber. It was just like, what the is going on here?
Well,
But
you knew from then on that it's like, okay, this is
right,
not the
this is where we're
Star Wars
heading.
that, yeah, it's gonna be different.
Yes,
It's gonna
definitely
be
gonna be
different.
different.
All right. So next, after Visions, we of course have
Ah,
Ahsoka.
finally.
Something that you can kind of handle,
Yes,
huh?
I can bring my blood pressure back down. Yes, Ahsoka. Super excited for this. We've been talking about this for a multitude of episodes on the show, just because we're so anxious to see Rosario Dawson reprise her roles as Ahsoka Tano. It's gonna pretty much talk about what happens after Rebels, and I'm assuming there's just gonna be a lot of flashbacks. Definitely, Hayden Christensen has already signed on to be in Ahsoka, both as Anakin Skywalker and I believe Darth Vader as well. So that's going to be really interesting, and I think we're actually going to see that battle that we got on Rebels. So they also have um, a another young lady who they've already casted for a younger version of Ahsoka.
Which
So we
I
have
was gonna
Rosario
say,
Dawson as the adult version, but then they
right?
have like almost like a slightly maybe like early 20s Ahsoka.
Probably Clone Wars era. You know, I mean, it's too bad that Ashley Eckstein couldn't be the one, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, so we know that, yeah, with the whole flashback thing, we know that obviously they had to get a younger actress to play Ahsoka for that, and I'm sure that's honestly that's probably where Hayden Christensen's going to be interacting the most is when they do the Clone Wars
Definitely.
flashbacks, stuff like that. Maybe if we're
Mm-hmm.
lucky, there might be more of a Rebels era because remember, you know, Ahsoka fought Darth Vader and you know found out he was Anakin, and you know there was that whole thing. So I don't know if they're going to actually bring that into a live action situation. They could. It'd be kind of cool. It's something that you and I have always talked about because it's no different than at the end of Rebels, like that last season when Maul faced the old Obi-Wan, the more Alec Guinness looking one. And
Oh yeah.
it'd be like, man, wouldn't it be kind of cool if they put that as like the season finale or something of the Obi-Wan series, or if they do a season 2, maybe cover that because they could. In my view, it would almost be that ultimate crossover thing, right? Where you take a scene that was done in animation and you put it in live action because they have done the opposite. I mean, on season 7 of the Clone Wars, we see a little bit of episode 3 in animation when they're doing the
Yeah.
whole overlap thing. So that would be kind of cool. Before we move on and talk more about Ahsoka,
Mhm.
David has a question. He says, you all referenced before that you wanted Star Wars to be endless and to expand the universe. So why wouldn't it be Star Wars? Well, for the simple reason of you want to expand the current Star Wars timeline. I'm not talking about the Star Wars saga, but the stuff that's established by Lucasfilm. You know, that's
Well, the reason why it's not Star Wars is because these people aren't following the Star Wars rules. That's why.
well, that's
I
a
mean,
big
simply
part of it.
put,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's like
They're
the
just
big
using
thing is like
characters and stuff. That's it.
they're creating characters, but like their dialogue and the story, you'll have to see the first. If you go back and go on Disney Plus and watch the first, season of Visions, you'll see what I'm saying. Like, there's nothing that these are number one. They're shorts, so and they have nothing to do with. um there's no canon in it, and even like Eric just said, there's no Lucasfilm has said themselves that there's no canon in this series. So that automatically eliminates it as expanding the universe. Yes, being creative, sure, but it's not building upon a world that has already been established, and it's not being governed by anything.
It's kind of like when Marvel does those what if things. You know, they're just like these fun little experimental things that aren't necessarily a part of the proper universe, as it were, the proper canon. It's just, you know, let's just play with this, what would happen if kind of a thing. And even though there are some characters from canon that do pop up in Visions, they do use a few of them. Mostly it's just like these unrelated stories. It's really just taking the concepts, things like because again, there's only like 1 or 2 episodes where you see like the Empire or something. And I mean, there might have been one episode. There was that one episode that where that one girl, like they took over that planet or something, and then she ended up helping and went against her father, and it was like the adopted kid or something. You remember that one?
Yeah.
that was probably the closest thing that you could technically canonize in the Star Wars proper universe. Other than that, though, all they did was they just said, look, we're just going to make kind of our traditional anime, but we're going to use lightsabers, and we're going to use, Jedi and Sith. And a lot of times they weren't even calling, like you said, they weren't even calling that by name. It was just kind of like, hey, if Star Wars were our property, what would we do with it? Now, that's not to say, again, they were sort of going to do that because the guy, I wish I could remember the guy's name. The guy that they had for that first episode, they were going to actually do a, huh?
Well, they even talked about like maybe even doing some crossover from this season, from season 1. Like they're actually going to reuse some of those same characters and bring them into this season and have them interact in different.
Well, but I mean, they were actually going to make the guy from the first episode of season 1. They were going to turn that into a novel. They were going to continue on. So the closest they would probably come would be to have like a parallel universe. So you would have your Star Wars proper, and then you would have, the Visions version or something. But okay, now David actually has an Ahsoka-related comment, so let's get to that one.
Mm-hmm.
I really think Ahsoka has a lot of potential to take Star Wars into the future. If casted properly, she could do she can headline a theatrical movie.
Absolutely, David.
Well, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. Honestly, Ahsoka is one of the greatest pieces of connective tissue between all of these movies, all the timeline, because she's in every timeline.
Yeah.
Or she's existed in every timeline. Let me just say that. So we come to know her in the prequel trilogy, in the prequel era, where she meets Anakin as a young Padawan. We watch her maturation, and she becomes a Jedi. Then she eventually leaves the Jedi Temple, and then,
which, if you think about it, that was a stroke of genius, because that is exactly how you explain her absence, particularly in Episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because Episode 3 you could sort of see, but in Episode 2, that's like the height of the Clone Wars. Why wasn't she there when we see her all throughout the Clone Wars season? And I mean, she was joined at the hip between Anakin and Obi-Wan. So,
that's where she eventually comes in. She comes at the beginning of that. So,
yeah, kind of.
The Clone Wars really already started, but she kind of dropped in the middle of that.
Right. So I mean, and of course, by having her leave the Order and all that stuff, and then of course, when you do season 7, and you see like, okay, Ahsoka and Rex are off on, their whole thing or whatever, and that's what I thought was so clever, is how they actually did that Lion King 1.5, but with Episode 3, it's like, okay, well, Episode 3 was taking place where we saw what was happening with Padme, Obi-Wan, Anakin, and all that. Here's what was happening on the other side with Darth Maul, Ahsoka, all these people that we saw in the Clone Wars. And the problem is, when you see things like Darth Maul coming back and all this other stuff, now you're going, okay, cool, but where were they in Revenge of the Sith? And now we know. And this is going to be a continuation of it because, as you said earlier, she had popped up in Rebels. And then afterwards, of course, she popped up. She made her live-action debut with Rosario Dawson in The Mandalorian Season 2. So, now, what's going on with her at this point? Because she was also in the Book of Boba Fett. So she's firmly established now in this post-Return of the Jedi universe. Now we get to see her. And, of course, the Ahsoka series is essentially going to be not just a sequel, but also a live-action version of Rebels, because we're going to see the crew of the Ghost. We already know that Hera's going to be in it. Sabine's going to be in it. I wonder if, what's his name? Zeb or whatever?
Zeb.
I wonder if they're going to
Zeb, Chopper.
CGI him. Yeah. Chopper, and we saw Chopper. He was actually, ironically, the first to make a live-action appearance in Rogue One. So, we're going to see a little bit of a reunion of that. And then, of course, the greatest of all the expanded universe characters that was canonized in Rebels, Grand Admiral Thrawn, he's going to be figuring prominently in this series. So there is a lot really that I think, it's going to be a toss-up to see where's the most meat on the bone going to be, in The Mandalorian Season 3 or in this.
Yeah. I mean, I think Ahsoka has the potential to carry on forward because of her connection, like because she's been on the inside of being a Jedi, so she has that perspective. Then being on the outside is kind of like a loner and kind of doing her own thing. We saw a lot of even some more of her development in Tales of the Jedi that we just wrapped up in November. So there's a lot of different things that Ahsoka brings to the table as far as the Star Wars universe, and the fact that she's still alive. Like, we still have to solve the biggest riddle of them all. How did she escape Vader in that whole fight?
Well, yeah,
like, that's the thing I want to know the most. Honestly,
yeah, nobody really addressed that.
Between
and that could be addressed.
Between that and Ezra, like, them trying to find Ezra if they find him or whatever.
Well,
like,
they cast him, so I would assume so.
Yeah. So unless they're just, maybe it could be flashbacks or stuff. I don't know, but
true. But here's the thing.
My thing is,
well, this even strengthens the point that maybe we do get a live action version of that Vader Ahsoka fight from Rebels, because it would make sense to flash back to that, and then, well, here's what happened, right, from Ahsoka's perspective, because we saw what happened with Vader in Rebels, but now we get to see it from that perspective. And then I think the other thing where I would probably agree with you on this one, that the most meat's going to be in Ahsoka, it's just the sheer number of newness in live action, right? I mean, we're going to get the Ghost Crew pretty much in live action. We're going to get Grand Admiral Thrawn in live action. We're going to get, I mean, not to mention the fact that it's taking place during the same time period, so you still have that remnants of the Empire thing, that post-Return of the Jedi world, which is, in a lot of ways, when you're immediately following, because, again, you have the gaps between the trilogies, right? So between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, you have like a 20-year gap. And then, obviously, between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, it's even more. It's like 30 years. So you have these big gaps. Now, they've kind of covered to death a lot of the middle stuff. But like we said in The Bad Batch, what makes it really fascinating is what happens in the immediate aftermath of this stuff, right? Like, immediately. Like, I remember when not the Lords of the Sith book so much, although that did kind of take place around that time as well, but the original Vader novel, Vader Rising, I think it was called. It was one of the last of the expanded universe books before Disney bought Lucasfilm. And it covered, well, what happened immediately after Vader was in the suit now. And him learning to fight with the suit, and how he almost gets his butt handed to him by a Padawan because he can't do his little Anakin moves anymore. He's got this clumsy suit that's not responding. And now Palpatine is training him as a Sith Lord. There's all kinds of things that immediately following Episode 3 are really fascinating. By the same token, you get a lot of really cool stuff like that after Episode 6. Well, now the Empire has fallen. So in a way, it's kind of mirroring. Instead of the Republic falling and the Empire taking over, you almost had the reverse. Now you have the Empire falling and the New Republic taking over. So, there's a lot of really cool little things in that. What happened to, well, all the characters of Ahsoka? I mean, so there's just a lot that they could cover in this that I think ultimately is going to make it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, well, all those points, are very valid, and that's why I feel like Ahsoka really is the connective tissue, and she has a lot to offer going forward, because we don't know what her end is, or if there is an end for her. Because we don't see her in the sequel trilogy with Rey, Poe, and so we don't know, did she die, or did she maybe somewhere else doing something?
Maybe she's one of the 10,000 ships that. Because remember, the Ghost is technically there. The Ghost was actually in that Rise of Skywalker final thing against Palpatine. However, I could be wrong. Was Ahsoka one of the voices that Rey heard?
Possibly.
If that's the case, that doesn't really bode well for her because that means she's basically dead. But I mean, she'd be pretty old by the Rise of Skywalker, to be honest.
Yeah.
David says, so far, Ahsoka is such a well-fleshed-out character. They took their time and made her earn our respect. Unlike the last chick, I think he means Rey, Ahsoka showed us she was good, she was great, instead of just being told she was great. Well, so there's one thing, though, that you have to understand. I get it. It's the new to Star Wars thing. Dude, Ahsoka's been around since, 2006. Okay, so there's a lot of source material there. I mean, you can't really compare those two because Ahsoka was Dave Filoni's very first character that he brought to George Lucas. And that was the one that, he created. And because Filoni is actually one of the creators of animation, and that's where Ahsoka basically lived for a long time. She lived in animation. And, each season of the Clone Wars, and there's 7 of them, except for season 6, which was kind of like that was the unfinished season when Lucas sold off Lucasfilm, and they just kind of put together what they had complete and made a season 6 out of it. But other than that, there's 22 episodes in every season of the Clone Wars, and Ahsoka's in most of them. So she's going to be more fleshed out.
Yeah, well, I think what he's more so getting at is the fact that, and your points are definitely ring true, Eric. But I think what David's more so talking about, and I get it, in Rise of Skywalker, or the sequel trilogy, I have to say that in a sequel trilogy, Rey is able to do a lot of stuff naturally, and it's just kind of like, why is she it's almost like we're forced to believe that she's this powerful already. Whereas with Luke, you get somebody like Luke, who's basically the grandson of the Force, and he wasn't able to do the stuff that Rey was doing out the gate. He still had tutelage from Yoda and Obi-Wan, and we got a chance to see that. Versus, when you look at Rey, Rey would just kind of have to accept the fact that she's this powerful being until we get to Rise of Skywalker and to realize that team. Then it's like,
I mean,
okay,
I will say
we
this.
can explain why she has that ability, but how is she able to utilize it?
Well, Luke did train her. The Luke training her in Episode 8 is very similar to Yoda training Luke, and the only thing that you can really point to that's not similar is at least Luke had Obi-Wan in Episode 4, whereas in Episode 7, it was a little bit of a stretch that she just suddenly mastered, influencing the weak-minded and all this other stuff. I mean, again, and look, if you go back
to her hand, and
look, yes and no. I mean, look, her fighting with the lightsaber was not exactly revealing any kind of a weird power.
I'm talking about when she called it to her. Because remember, we all thought it was Luke who was, when that lightsaber was rattling in the snow, and then it was Rey. How were you able to do that?
I know. Well, and that's again. So Episode 7 was really the only episode where it was really far-fetched. And if people watched the show back then, we were the first ones to point that out.
Well, true, but even in The Last Jedi, though, it's like the fact that she was okay. She has some training for Luke. I mean, granted, we really didn't see a whole lot, but it's like, okay, you do have to accept the fact that, and Luke was really hesitant about training her, though. That was the thing. It's not like how it was with Yoda. Where Yoda, at first, he was like, all right, he's too old to begin the training, and then, but eventually, okay, he's hopping on his back, and, he's flipping, and he's showing him how to move rocks and all that type of stuff. You see that Yoda eventually accepted that fact that, okay, Luke is the option right now. With Rey, although, Luke might have, okay, tried to teach her, okay, and through it all, what do you see? Light, darkness. And then he shut down again. He's like, no, I'm not doing it. So it's just kind of like he still resisted really training her. So we really never got a chance to see Luke actually train her. It was just kind of
But
like,
there's also a couple other things you got to look at and all that too. And again, and it's sort of like the way that Lucas explains some things. You kind of go, all right, man. I mean, I guess we just had to accept this. It doesn't make the most sense, but so I could accept all the episode 9 stuff because she had all the Jedi texts. Okay,
True.
that's something people didn't have. The other thing you got to look
and
at,
Leia.
and Leia. The other thing you have to look at with episode 7 even is that when Luke was coming up, Palpatine had just erased any evidence of the Jedi, anything like that. I mean, Luke didn't even really know hardly anything about it. Obi-Wan had to tell him the Force, all this stuff. By the time that episode 7 hits, Luke Skywalker had defeated Palpatine. He had restarted a Jedi Order. And then, of course, the whole Ben Solo thing happened. But the point is, the Jedi were known. There was stuff that was known about it. You could study certain things. And the thing was called The Force Awakens. The will of the Force basically said, okay, that's the one. I'm going to give this chick a little bit of a boost. And that's what it did.
So, yeah, I mean, I get it. Like, Snoke kind of tried to hint towards, like, well, light, darkness rises, light rises to meet it. So it's like it was trying to balance it out because Kylo was so powerful, and Snoke and Palpatine basically.
Yeah, and I mean,
around, so
and there was a lot of information about Jedi and the Force, and a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, but I mean, there's information in the sense of, yes, they were around and what they did, but not how they did it. That's different. It's almost
that's
like,
where the Force amplified it. Look, the Force just works through people. I mean, it's not like, here's the thing. This is one of the things that Lucas actually was explaining in his commentaries. Because one of the things that he fought against some of the studio, I mean, for the most part, the studios left him alone because it was his independent film, right? But by the time Empire came around, he wanted to lose the whole, using your finger, pointing, doing this kind of thing with your hand, because he's like, look, the Force just kind of works through you. You don't have to, like, direct it or anything like that. You just pretty much think it in a way. But the studios were like, no, the movie audience needs a visual representation that you're doing this. And it was kind of the same thing that JJ was sort of going for. He was trying to pay, like, sort of like do an homage. Now, again, don't get me wrong. Even though I'm explaining all this stuff, and it sounds like I'm defending it, I'm not. It was all clumsily executed. I mean, I understand the concepts behind it, but it was totally clumsily executed. And they deserve every bit of ridicule. and criticism and scorn and everything that they're getting from it because they executed it poorly. Rey became a Mary Sue, and you're just kind of like, you didn't do a good enough job conveying this. I mean, if you have to explain all this after the fact, it's like the other criticism I have, although it actually kind of fits neatly into this point that I'm making. But it's kind of like how in episode 9, suddenly everybody knew who the Sith was. You get these guys, 2 guys, like people in the Empire. The Empire didn't even know Palpatine was a Sith Lord. They didn't even really know Vader was either.
Based upon your own argument, though, you have to think about it. If they knew this much about the Jedi because Luke, of course, was the one who saved everybody from Vader and Palpatine, that all had to come out as well then.
After episode 6, yes, but not episodes 4 and 5, when the Empire was at the height of it and Palpatine had still squashed all the knowledge. Yeah, floodgates open after episode 6, and yes, and that's what I'm talking about. That's my point. My point is that, all this stuff comes out, you can understand it. And even though that bugged me, when you take it in light of, again, clumsy execution, but it's kind of like, okay, well, now it becomes part of this rich history that everybody kind of knows about. Now, of course, some people are wondering, You know, was it more like folklore or myth or whatever? You know, and that's, of course, Han Solo's like, nope, it's all true. You know, and so that's why, sure, by episode 9, everybody knows.
I guess what I'm saying is, for me, like, I put it in context based upon myself. It's like a history book versus a ritual book are two different things. So I'll just use myself as an example. You can look up the history of Freemasons in the country, and there's historical accounts that exist, right? I think that's what the general public sees. But then there's like the books that we as members of the organization have that explain rituals and everything like that, that's known solely to us, and conceptually speaking. So that's what I'm saying is like, okay, I can understand Rey knowing about like events and things that have happened and maybe some abilities that the Jedi were able to do. But in order to figure out how to do them,
but
you would
again,
need those.
The Force. That's the missing component. If the Force decides, I want this chick to know how to levitate something or do whatever, it's just going to do it through her. And that was one of the things that, you know, it's...
Yeah, that I get your point when you say lazy writing. That's lazy writing.
It's lazy writing, but that's the explanation. I'm not defending
that.
The execution. I'm just saying that's the way that it's working in universe. You know, it just that's their explanation. You got to roll with their explanation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, thank goodness they made her Palpatine's granddaughter. They almost had to. Yeah. Because at least then you could say, okay, there's a prodigious... Look, you're talking about the granddaughter of the greatest Sith Lord ever, not to mention the fact that, you know, Palpatine, as you find out, especially like in Shadows of the Sith and all this stuff, you know, look, he was orchestrating the whole Rey thing from the very beginning, okay? Mm-hmm. She's the daughter of, like, his clones or something. You know, she's got some power that's built into her already because of Palpatine. It wasn't just like a biological, hey, if I'm Muhammad Ali's grandson, I might have a little bit of aptitude towards boxing. No, this is like Palpatine is creating life, creating these clones, and pretty much imbibing them with certain powers because his whole plan is for her to become a vessel for him.
Yeah, he imbues them with his abilities, right?
Exactly. So when you look at it in light of that, it makes perfect sense.
Well,
but they could have. But again, that wasn't even right because Colin Trevorrow, who was originally going to do the Duel of the Fates movie, Palpatine wasn't actually alive.
Right.
See, that's my point. Point is, if they had planned that from the beginning, then they would have probably executed it better.
Right.
So let's see. So David says Rey, it's R-E-Y, by the way. Hey. Jamie Foxx plays Rey Skywalker. Rey was shoved down our throats like Captain Marvel because of propaganda and directors trying to break gender norms. Even with established characters, whoever's playing them must make it believable. No, not for the reasons I just spent like the last 10 minutes giving. You know, it's kind of like, I mean, the idea that Rey was, you know, kind of the female version. Look, I mean, if you really want to be hyper-technical about it, Rey's not even the first. Look, you got Ahsoka, who was like infinitely pretty powerful, actually. You have Leia, who technically is more powerful than Luke. You know, she was the one that Yoda wanted to train. She was the one that was meant to be the one, but they ended up not doing that. And she kind of rejected a lot of this stuff. But it's been, you know, it's been confirmed by Lucas plus all the other canonical novels and all that stuff that Leia actually has more raw power and has more ability to become more powerful than even Luke was.
Yeah, I think what David is basically saying once again, I think it's because Ray was it wasn't flushed out that how she's that way. It made it seem it comes off as like, okay, you just want this super bad chick, to just be, a butt kicker just for propaganda's sake. It
Well,
just gives
right.
that
For the agenda,
illusion
the whole woke agenda. I mean,
for
look,
the whole
let's
woke. Yeah,
let's
exactly.
be honest. I mean, but what I'm trying to say though is even though I'm sure that had a lot to do with why Disney did what they did, it's not necessarily shoehorning it in. There's precedence there. You have Leia, you have all these other people. It's not like where they took what used to be a male character and made it female, or hey, let's make this woman like it's some out of place thing or something like that. In this universe, again, I'm talking about it flows okay. The biggest problem was, as we've said a gazillion times, they did not plan this. They really didn't have, nobody sat down with all the directors that were supposed to be doing this. JJ, Rian Johnson, Colin Trevorrow, sit in a room, kind of like what they did with the High Republic writers, say, hey, let's come up with a basic outline or a treatment of what this trilogy is going to be. Let's come up with a story. Let's go beginning, middle, end, act 1, act 2, act 3. It's like, okay, JJ, you're act 1. So you got to start here, you got to end here. You can do whatever you want in between. And so on and so forth. Instead, what they did was JJ did his thing, and then they just let Rian pick it up from there. And then they let Colin pick it up from there. And then when some movie, ironically, I think it was Jurassic World, it was one of the movies that he did that didn't perform well, and they took episode 9 away from him, and they brought in JJ because he did 7. It's like, well, all right. And one of JJ's biggest challenges, him and Lawrence Kasdan both, they're like, well, what do we do now? Because Rian Johnson took it in a direction that JJ never really wanted it. Now, of course, people forget that JJ did executive produce episode 8. But as far as he was concerned, he was done having to tell the story. And now all of a sudden, he's looking like, okay, Luke's dead. All this stuff is happening. I mean, I got to figure out what to do with this.
Yeah, I think that he was executive producer, but I think his hands were already tied prior to, like, just
Yeah.
let Rian do what he needs to do. You just let him tell his story. You just help him out tell it. And it's like, and I don't think at that time, I don't think he expected to have to do.
That's it.
He probably didn't care because he expected to have to do.
He's like,
to
yeah,
follow
do
it
whatever
up,
you want,
like,
right? I don't care what you do. Do whatever you want. And then all of a sudden,
yeah,
it's
and
like,
then
oh, man.
I got to do this again. I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah,
this is
because,
cool.
and I mean, the only thing that I will say this, and then we'll move on to the next, the next thing. The only
Wait,
thing
there's more.
there's one more. There's one more series we have to cover. But the only thing that I will say to wrap that discussion up is that the only thing that they did kind of plan was that 7 was going to be more Han Solo focused, 8 was Luke focused. Had Carrie lived, 9 would have been Leia focused. And honestly, the complication of her death cannot be understated. I mean, not only is it a tragic thing and it was sad from that perspective, but when you look at it strictly through the lens of the franchise, it just did untold damage to the story that they were going to do. All right, so now moving on, finally we have Skeleton Crew.
Oh, yeah, this.
Yeah, this one, the Jude Law one. Now, Skeleton Crew, in a way, now this one is aimed probably more towards your like preteens teens thing, because it's kind of got like a Stand By Me meets Ocean's 11 or something like that, right? It's got
it's supposed to be like an 80s coming of age type thing, for these young people or whatever. And I think they needed like 4 people between the ages of like 11 and 12 years old to kind of play these characters. And Um, it's being described as a galactic version of a classic Amblin coming of age adventure film of the 80s.
Or you
Of
know
course,
what?
it's
You know what a
starring
more recent
Jude
film
Law.
example might be is Super 8. You remember that movie? That was a
Yeah, I do.
Spielberg movie, that alien thing, but it basically dealt with that group of teenagers, and it was kind of like that too.
Yeah, and it takes place in the same era as The Mandalorian too.
Oh, does
So
it?
that
No,
should be
that I wasn't
interesting.
really
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, so that'll be cool. Now, do we know how many episodes this is going to be?
Let me see if they have anything on that.
Yeah, see if they got anything on that, and also see if they got a release date on it, because that's another one. Because Ahsoka, what was the release date even on Ahsoka?
Summer.
Was it? Let me see. You look up Skeleton Crew. I'll double down on Ahsoka. So rumors are suggesting late 2023 for Ahsoka. So that, which makes sense because they don't really want to front load these things too much.
I heard Skeleton Crew might be May 17th.
Yeah, that could be. But yeah, I mean, basically the show, it centers on a group of children lost in space. And it's their journey of finding their way home. So you know what it's really kind of like is Battlestar Galactica. There's a sci-fi show I don't think we've referenced in our show yet. Usually we're pretty...
Not often.
Not often. We may have. I mean, because after all, Katie Sackhoff did play Starbuck in the remake. Although I'm still partial to the late 70s version of that show. But yeah, Skeleton Crew kind of has a Stand By Me meets Battlestar Galactica vibe to it. And the fact that it stars Jude Law is kind of cool too. I always thought he was a good actor, and I always thought that he was pretty good in anything he did. So,
yeah.
This should be interesting. I'm curious on. Oh, did you find out how many episodes it is? Did they say that at all?
I've seen something that's like story or whatever. Like based off the Clone Wars. But it's basically like it's supposed to be kind of set like the Goose.
Interesting. Yeah, that's... I'm not really entirely sure.
Yeah, the premise of Skeleton Crew brings to mind before so that it kind of brings up that, remember that episode of Clone Wars where Ahsoka was on that ship with with the younglings and they had to stop those pirates from, with the lightsabers and stuff. Yeah, that's much kind of what Skeleton Crew was kind of based upon.
Yeah, like you said, it takes place in the same time frame as Mandalorian. Still not seeing how many episodes this thing is expected to be.
Yeah, I haven't seen that either.
I mean, well, let's see if IMDb has anything. If they don't, then nobody knows.
What do you mean nobody knows?
Although there's what was that site? There's some site. That was how they found out that Tamira Morrison was actually going to be in the Boba Fett series. Because there's some site that talks about, it's like a inside thing where it talks about upcoming shows, but like from a trade perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's see. It looks like it's going to be 8 episodes.
8? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 8 episodes, and let's see if there's like a... Sometimes they'll actually... Yeah, they just have 2023 as a release date, so... So yeah, this one should be pretty cool, too. I mean, again, you don't really know until you see it. There's a lot of things that sound great on paper, and they totally suck, and then there's other stuff where you're like, I might pass on this.
You need it, and then it actually being cooler than what you thought it will be.
You're sucked in right from episode 1, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is the greatest show I've ever seen. So, we'll have to see. But I mean, that said, man, there's just a lot of stuff that's happening, in this whole 2023 cycle of Disney Plus when it comes to Star Wars. There's some shows. I mean, I think we can agree that probably Young Jedi is the one we're looking forward to the least. I'm sure Visions is right up there for you, too. I mean, for me, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do with that show. I'm curious to see where it goes, how it differs from the first season. I know you're probably praying it's better considering we review that show.
And it's 9 episodes of it.
And it's 9 episodes, too, yeah. It's kind of like, hey, could we do 9 of Obi-Wan and 6 of Visions,
Absolutely.
Because that's true. And hey, listen, I mean, I was right there with you. Even though I found something redeeming in almost every episode, I think there was only one episode I really hated. And even though there were some things that I thought were really cool about it, I was kind of doing the same thing. I'm like, dang, how many more of these things do we have to do?
Yes, 9 weeks of this.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I mean, it's 2 months and a week, basically. It's
a commitment.
It's a commitment. It's a commitment. And depending on what goes on, I mean, about the only other thing that we could do, it would actually make it a little less painless or less painful, is if we did a thing to where, we just binged all the episodes and then we pre-recorded the reviews and just knocked it all out in like a day or something. And then just, put them out there and everything else. Maybe that would have made it a little bit better. I don't know, but yeah. But again, I mean, I think that overall, we got the Bad Batch Season 2, and that's going to start next week. And you guys, check us out next Friday because we're going to start reviewing it right out the gate. I mean, that's going to be our first review show. Is the Bad Batch.
You guys don't have to worry about what we're going to talk about. So, every Friday we'll be talking about the Bad Batch, and Monday we're going to be having our Star Wars Legacy.
What is Star Wars? Yeah.
So,
I mean,
at least for a couple of, at least probably guys, 5 to 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you guys will know exactly what we're talking about. Well, and I mean, Bad Batch is going to be like 16.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 4 months, man. We're going to be doing that into April. That's pretty crazy. And by then, there's probably going to be, it's going to overlap with The Mandalorian. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to definitely make sure that we finish our What is Star Wars series before March. We're going to have to maybe make March 1st that, the cutoff for that one. So, but let us know. Let us know what you guys are looking forward to most. Which one of these shows coming out in 2023 are you personally looking forward to the most? We want to know. Let us know in the comments section. Again, if you like this video, if you like what it is we do, if you kind of like this whole vibe, we're just getting together every Friday, every Monday and discussing Star Wars, hit that like button. And hit the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed. We are live every Monday at 8 and every Friday at 8. So you'll always be able to catch us then. Again, if we can't be live, we'll pre-record the show and we will have it as a premiere. So you guys will definitely be able to chat in. It really won't change the dynamics of the show that much other than will we be able to chat in with you guys. But yeah, kind of looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward to our discussion on The Empire Strikes Back on Monday. That should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
All right, so until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.